Nancy Hoffman, thank you for being part of the Relentless podcast. I appreciate it. I know your time is limited and valuable. So I like to start with back to your childhood. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? And a few impactful things that happened when you were a kid.
Well, I was born in Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is a town just south of Charlotte. Today, it's almost a suburb of Charlotte, but growing up, Charlotte was the big city that we would go to for shopping and for entertainment. But at any rate, I was born there, grew up there, went to school there from first grade, and then graduated from Rock Hill High School. Grew up in a very middle class family. My father was a supermarket manager with A&P for many of those years, and then was with a couple of other companies. My mother was a stay-at-home mom until my brother and I were probably in junior high or high school, I guess. And then she worked for many years with one of our local downtown, typical southern town, where you had a retail store that was both china and gifts and silver for all the brides getting married, and then also a jewelry component to that too. So yeah, so that was my growing up years. I mean, I started playing. My parents. I became interested in music, so my parents bought me. I decided I would play the saxophone beginning in grade 5, I think. So my parents sprung for a great saxophone for me. So I played in the band beginning at that fairly young age, and then started taking piano lessons. Yeah, I had something that was really impactful was my third grade teacher. Actually my first grade teacher too, who was fabulous. But my third grade teacher in particular, who actually was a friend of my mother's, but considerably younger than my mother. But she introduced us as third graders to great art and music. And I really think, not only think, I know that was really terribly influential in terms of, as I grew older, my interest in music, and then my interest in art. And so I credit Ruth Wendell for helping me develop two areas that became very important to me, throughout my life. So I guess if we're looking for things that are impactful, that was certainly one. Just that, my parents were, my father in particular was very politically involved. He actually lost his job at one point in time for taking the lead in organizing grocery retail employees in the AFL-CIO's retailers or food service workers. And he was reemployed fairly quickly when they determined that was not a good thing to have done. But so I think I developed some of my respect for politics and political involvement, and even and perhaps other causes, and in seeing him take the lead in an initiative to help people in terms of being treated unfairly. In his case, workers in the grocery stores were sometimes, they were supposed to work an 8-hour day, but often they would be required to clock out and then come back and work for another hour or two off the clock, which they were not paid for. So that was his concern, and that was what was bothering him, and that's why he actually made contact with union officials and got involved in that. So I'm sure there were lots of other things, but I had a really very a typical, as far as I remember it, good childhood. My grandparents, my grandfather had died when I was quite young, but my grandmother remained on the farm for a number of years after that. And, my brother and I practically spent summers at the farm, which was 10 miles out of town, I guess. But, we would go out there and spend the week. My parents might come out for the weekend. But I remember that as just kind of a wonderful time of just being outdoors in the open just all day and just to do whatever you wanted to do as a kid. Go play in the creek, go pick berries, help your grandmother secure the eggs from the chicken house in the morning, whatever. So, that was kind of my childhood growing up.
Cool. I always ask because I'm always curious. Where all of us are, of course, this amalgamation of nature and nurture, right? Our genetics as well as the environments we grew up in. You mentioned the arts being introduced and the being at the farm and your father's work on the political spectrum, sort of standing up for people. Do you have a sense, looking back now, I'm sure that there's parts of you that are also very reflective of your mother, who she was, how she did things. Do you have a sense of sort of what parts of you came from which sides of the genes, as well as did you find yourself as you move through life, are you kind of more like your father, more like your mother?
Yeah, I think I'm probably a combination of both. My father was much more impulsive than my mother, and my mother was the one who sometimes had to put the reins onto things. I remember my father. We lived very close to the Catawba River, which runs very close to Charlotte too, and Duke Energy controls much of the Catawba today. But several of my friends' parents had little cabins at the river, and I remember my father looking at a property in the cabin. Back in that day, it couldn't have cost a lot, but whatever. My mother felt that was much too extravagant and not something that we could afford to do, so she quashed it. So and mother took care of the checkbook. I remember in our household, she paid the bills. So it was probably easier for my father to want to be a little extravagant because he wasn't controlling the purse strings to some extent. But at any rate, and the other thing I remember too is my parents, I think, were almost as unbiased as you could be growing up in a small southern town. We had a small Jewish community in the town of Rock Hill, and they were all, they were all in small retailers downtown, and with one exception was Saul Abramson, who owned a scrapyard, whom my father was very good friends with. But both of my parents being in retail were friends with the Jewish families who were retailers in my hometown. Both of my parents, I think, were very respectful of blacks growing up, and to the extent that one could, felt that they should be treated equally. And so I think that was another influence that I had in my life growing up. Yeah, I will tell you, I now have a brother who's a MAGA Republican, so how he could have converted to what he is today from the family that he grew up in is very difficult. Well, not difficult, it's just impossible for me to understand, as a matter of fact. But anyway, I'm sure that happens in other families as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, politics is the hot topic now. I'm sure we'll talk some of it as we go. But so you sort of kind of brought us up on your childhood. That I sort of think now high school, college, teachers, friends, people who might have kind of nudged you or guided you along the way during those years. And I'm always kind of curious, was there a rebellious period? And if so, not looking for anything incriminating, but what did that look like for you? And if not, what kind of kept you out of that?
Well, I mean, I think I always, and I never wanted to displease or embarrass my parents. I remember going to Myrtle Beach with friends after my high school graduation. And there was too much drinking or an alcohol consumption that went on in that house. I remember one particular evening. And I was really always concerned that my parents would find out about that. They didn't. But even curfews and that sort of thing, I think I was never rebellious in that way. Although my parents always said that, always felt, I think both parents, that I had a very strong, my mother called it a hard-headed streak. And that from that point of view, I was perhaps not the easiest child. I was not docile growing up. I could be, I could be rebellious in terms of just saying no to certain things and having to having to be essentially made to do them, probably. So I think that's as far as that went. Growing up, I certainly, gosh, in my young adult life, I probably took some chances in some of my personal life. Fortunately, it all turned out okay, but I look back upon that and think that I was sometimes really lucky that things worked out.
Yeah, that you ended up where you are now instead of somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what did you study in school?
When I look back at it now, we all, for instance, my husband said that if he had his career to live all over again, and he'd been in the Army, came back to New York. He was drafted after his first year of college, so he came back after the war and on the GI Bill, finished NYU in New York, and then did a course in foreign trade. But later in life, and Jack had a very successful business career, but he later in life realized that had he had it to do over again, he would really have pursued an academic life. Instead, he came here and ended up getting a master's degree here in Greensboro, but really enjoying that aspect of his life much more than he did his business life. So I guess we also sort of had those feelings. I think it was sort of a lack of guidance. Isaac took a very traditional role. I think if I had known the right people or gotten some other encouragement, my life might have taken a different turn. But, I ended up going to college, getting a degree in English and history. What the hell are you going to do with, so I taught school for a few years. But interestingly enough, I ended up teaching in the little town of Beaufort, South Carolina, where I have a house today because, number one, it's a place that I love. Number two, I had friends there from 40 years ago, and it's just a charming place to be. So, and I just really made some wonderful friendships there. And I don't know whether you have read any of Pat Conroy's books or not, but Pat was a friend, and we taught together at Beaufort High School, and then had some work together after that. And so I knew Pat for a long time. And when I ran my first city council campaign here in Greensboro, I wanted to choose a gift for people who had really helped me greatly with that campaign. And so I called Pat up, and I said, I'd like to give your little book of essays, or they really are sort of personal stories, but almost sort of essays in a way. It's called My Reading Life. And I said, I'd really like to buy 40 copies of it. And I said, if I have them shipped to you, will you autograph them to my supporters? And so he did. So that's Beaufort became a great influence on my life. But I met a very sophisticated man in Beaufort who lived in New York City, but had lived in Atlanta, grown up in Atlanta. And Harvey Smith had a tremendous influence on me as a young adult, and really encouraged me to do something other than spend my life in the teaching profession. So my business career is a result of Harvey Smith's friendship and mentorship. So that's how I started my career in the textile business.
So that was a good segue, was into that. You mentioned teaching Beaufort. You also mentioned your husband. So where are we from teaching to textiles to being married and all of
Yeah.
that?
Well, as a result of Harvey's encouragement, I had friends, very good friends, who were with Milliken at in the 1970s. Milliken was the third largest textile manufacturer in the U.S., but they also had a couple plants in Europe. And I had very good friends with Milliken, so that enabled me to get an interview with Milliken, and it happened to be, 1976. Milliken and other major employers were really looking to have their executive teams be more diverse, meaning women and blacks at that time. And so I benefited from that. So that they were willing to hire somebody with a liberal arts degree who had been teaching for 6 or 7 years. And the natural place for me to start my career was human resources. So that was how I began my corporate career. Yeah, at Milliken, you go through a very formal training program your first year. You spend time in various mill locations, learning the particular jobs there. It was an intensive program, but a really good program. And then, I was working in an HR department at the largest textile mill that Milliken had, which was in Greenville, South Carolina. It was a mill really almost right downtown, or just a few blocks, but a mile from downtown Greenville, and it sat on 17 acres. It was the largest plant in our gray goods business, which is where I was working. So, yeah, from I worked for a year down south with Milliken, but I had indicated that I would really very much like to have an opportunity to spend some time in marketing in New York. So they gave me that opportunity. So I moved to New York City in 1977 with Milliken, and worked for them in New York for 3 years. And then I joined I went to work for a customer of Milliken's in the apparel industry in Los Angeles. And so I kept my apartment in New York, but I moved to LA. And so I was in the apparel business for a couple of years. I didn't like it particularly. There's some aspects of it I liked. But we were in our factory in Los Angeles, we were hiring, a lot of our people were undocumented. That didn't bother me, but what bothered me was the feds coming in every couple of months to check people.
Yeah.
Not as bad as it is today, but so I ended up just leaving, resigning from that. I was director of marketing, and just said I'm going to move back to the East Coast and decide what to do. I knew enough people. So I interviewed in New York, and I could have gone back. I could have gone back to Milliken, as a matter of fact, but I ended up had an opportunity to join a financial services company. I had, again, through friends who were in that business, and it was one of the Wall Street firms. So I joined them, and again went through a fairly extensive training program to become, a financial advisor. So I was living in Florida. Again, it's so funny. I thought, great, I want to move to Florida so I can play tennis all the time. And it was great weather, and I got to play a lot of tennis, and it so happened that I met Jack there. So it was all very fortuitous, and, kind of worked out. It was good. It was a good thing. Yeah.
So how long were you in the finance industry?
Golly, I joined Prubation in let me see, stop and think about that a minute. I was there 3 years, I guess. I was a year plus in Florida, and then met Jack, and we got married. I met Jack in January of 82, and we got married in October of 82. So And so Jack had an opportunity to work for a small trading company on the West Coast, and in San Jose, and so I transferred to our base office in Palo Alto.
Oh yeah.
So we were there for 2 years, and then neither of us was. It's not that we were unhappy in California. I mean, it's a great place to live. We lived in Menlo Park. We could walk onto the Stanford campus from where we lived. I could really walk to my office in downtown Palo Alto if I wanted to, and Jack was working in San Jose. But my mother's health was beginning to decline. She was still living in South Carolina. Jack's mother was living in New York City, and she was considered somewhat older than my mother, and same situation with her. And so we just decided we both needed to be back on the East Coast. So that was our reason. So we left California in '84.
Yeah.
Came back east.
Did you land in Greensboro at that time?
We landed in New York City.
Oh, okay.
And the Berkshires. And I, again, through friends that I'd known with Milliken, landed a job at Allied Stores in the, I guess it was really market research department. I was working for a guy who had been at Milliken, and basically, we did all of the market research for new store openings. Allied Stores, for instance, owned Jordan Marsh, Miami, and Jordan Marsh. You're from Boston, so you know Jordan Marsh. Which was that was one of Allied's major stores. They Allied owned Brooks Brothers, and they owned Ann Taylor. Yeah, they had East Coast, Midwest, and West Coast stores.
Yep.
So that's where I spent some time.
That was downtown Boston. There was Jordan Marsh
and
on
Filings.
the corner and Filings.
Yeah.
So
yep.
So up to this point, you've been back and forth across the country a number of times.
Yeah.
You've worked in at least 3 or 4 different industries.
Yeah.
And multiple companies. To me, there's a lot of, I don't know, catchphrases or specific language that's used around adaptability, resilience, things of that nature. What was as you were going through this, I'm assuming you found things you enjoyed, and then there were other things you probably enjoyed less, but what were the key sort of learnings going through these different experiences? Were you driven by the excitement of just learning new things, or was it just more like, I got to get a gig and so I got to find,
No, I've always been driven by wanting to learn new things. And once I get bored and I don't think that things are going to change very much, then I'm usually looking for whatever the next opportunity is. And I remember saying a number of years ago, we were talking about careers or whatever to somebody, and people always talk about careers and being in terms of ladders. And so I said, my career has never been a ladder. It's been more like a jungle gym where you may take one step up, but then you may take a lateral step, or or something is interesting enough that you may be willing to take one step back. And so I've always sort of looked at my life, my life and my career that way, I guess. But I think it's made it interesting from that point of view. I loved being in the furniture business, and I was recruited to a small furniture manufacturer in New Hampshire. I had worked in the Berkshires with a family-owned home furnishings company there. We had a national catalog. We had, I guess, the time I went to Country Curtains to run their store division, I can't remember whether we had 8 or 9 stores, maybe 10 retail stores. I opened another 5 and renovated 3 or 4 during my 4 years with them. But I remember some of the marketing things that I had done at Allied, some of the systems that I had used. I was able to use those at Country Curtains. For instance, I became familiar with a way of with a methodology for a data system that allowed us at Country Curtains to use our customer database for our catalog to pinpoint where we should be opening stores. Now, they had never done that before. They just sort of opened stores where they thought they liked them. They were all very successful, but at least I applied this data system, and at least knew that what we were doing was the right place. So it was, whatever you learn in one job or one position and with one company, you sort of carry that with you to the next one, and then you probably learn some things there which you take on to the next one. I remember Jack always felt the same way. He said he always, when he got bored, that was when he was ready to change jobs or change positions. So, from that point of view, then, I left Country Curtains and went to work for Yield House. Part of it was mainly furniture and home accessories, and we had a huge catalog business, but we had 20 retail stores in New England, Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, New Hampshire. And I had an opportunity to become a managing partner and have a little ownership in the business. So that was appealing to me at that stage. And I had the opportunity there to start a wholesale business because we were manufacturing our own furniture. So I thought, we have the manufacturing capacity, and we have a branded product that the consumer knows. So why not start a wholesale business based on that? So I got to open a showroom for Yield House in High Point, and really do a whole startup business that had a good. We had a very good track record those first 4 years of growth, and the great potential. And that was useful when we decided to sell the business at some point when we did sell the business. So
I connected when you said whatever you learn you can carry over. I started out in the print business, actually running an offset press. We were printing books, and I saw some of the first fully digital printing presses come into the United States, and I'd never used a computer. I mean, word processing or whatever, but it's just some guy, instead of busted up hands like me, he had a white shirt on and a tie, and he just pushed buttons on a computer. And I thought, if I don't figure out how to use a computer, I'm going to be screwed. So connected with that, I was thinking, I don't know, it'll show how terrible I am at doing background research, especially since we have common friends that I could have just asked. But did you ever have children during all of this? Because it sounds like
it was the first marriage for Jack and me.
Yeah.
Jack was 17 years older.
Okay.
And I was 40 when we got married.
Oh,
it was almost 57 2 months later. We were married in New York City. So, no, we just sort of made the decision. Jack had said if I felt strongly about children, I mean, he didn't feel strongly, but if I did. But, I was 40. I was kind of just beginning to sort of hit my stride a little bit in my career. And it just didn't seem like, it just wasn't. The timing was right. Yeah. Timing is everything sometimes.
I was going to ask the only reason I asked that question is I was like, with everything that you had going on, that would have been like
a little bit crazy.
Yeah. So going from corporate into politics, and for us, we were Gen Xers. And so we kind of, I think, started out at the beginning politically of where we are today. I kind of see this as an arc that's been happening for a while now. So a lot of us really had this idea, I don't want kids because I don't want to bring a kid into this world. I don't necessarily feel that way now, but in my teens and 20s, those were the things that we said to each other. So what was it that kind of motivated you to say, I could make a lot of money and be at the top sitting in a nice office somewhere in corporate, but I'd rather go and get screamed at every week?
Well, it's interesting. I did work corporately. Once I came south, I worked for Stanley Furniture for several years. And then I left. We actually sold the division in Salisbury that I was a vice president in. And so I worked for 2 years for a small home furnishings manufacturer north of Raleigh, the little town of Oxford, and Jack and I bought a house in Raleigh. And then, I started a new division for them. And, after I kind of got that startup done, that was done. So I actually, we were living in Raleigh, and I got recruited to come to work for a company that was in High Point. So that was really what brought us to Greensboro. I was there for only 2 years. It was a company in High Point that had a catalog. It was a custom window, custom art framing business, but they had a catalog business which I ran, and they had 2 retail stores. We had one at our corporate location in High Point, and then I opened a store in Battleground here. But there were more things that I disliked about it than liked. It was mostly the ownership and how the business was being run. So I resigned, and it was really about that time that 2 good friends of mine, one, a very good friend who had been the president of Brooks Brothers, president and CEO of Brooks Brothers, and I had known Bill for a very long time, and going back to my Milliken days, long before I was even married to Jack. And interesting enough, Bill and his wife and Jack and I were living in California at the same time and were friends during that time. And then when they moved east, we saw each other on the East Coast too. But at any rate, Bill had left Brooks Brothers and gone on to do something else, but he was joining with a friend of his who was in Seattle in a executive recruiting practice. And so they both got in touch with me and asked if I would be interested in joining them. So I did. I joined that executive recruiting practice in 1998, I guess. Yeah, 1998. So I'd worked in that. I worked in that practice until I ran for city council in 2011, and I continued to be a part of the practice. I have not worked really in the practice since probably 2012 or 2013. So it's been 12 years. Although, when I'm free, they have a staff meeting on it's a small group, of course, on Fridays at noontime. So I join them because they still keep I'm still, if you look at their website, I'm there. If they depending upon the search, they'll use my credentials. And they want me to come back to work for them full time next year if I choose, once I finish council. So I was happy. I was really that work interested me. It was flexible. We were recruiting for top management, executive management in various disciplines, and I was good at it. I'd had a very nice career. But I decided to run for city council in 2011, and the reason I did is because in 2009, a very conservative council was elected, both the mayor and four other members of council. And I remember I'd get up and sit at the breakfast room table in the morning, and Jack we'd be reading the paper, and I would read whatever the latest they had done, and I kept saying, I think I'm going to run for city council. So by the end of 2010, I had decided that I really would. And Jack said, "Are you crazy?" And I said, "Well, maybe, but I'm going to do it." So I started preparing in January of 2011 to run for council. That is really letting people know and writing a business. I sat down and wrote a business plan. And so I ran in 2011. Quite as an unknown. I knew I knew a lot of people in Greensboro, but I was not a high level known person in this city. But I had been a good observer of politics here, and I had seen a couple things that I thought worked for people who had gotten elected. I remember when Pricey Harrison was her first run for the House in North Carolina. I was working in my front yard, I think on a Sunday afternoon, and Pricey was walking the neighborhood. She was canvassing by herself. And she stopped and we talked. And I said, Jack and I will vote for you, and please bring me a yard sign to go in our yard. So that made me understand the power of canvassing and connecting personally with people. And in probably four previous years, I had watched in the city council election when a woman named Sandra Anderson Grote ran for city council at large. She was a small builder, and she built modest homes in East Greensboro primarily. She again ran for city council at large, and she won. Not only did she win, but she won the most at-large votes, which made her mayor pro tem. And Sandra had the billboard on Battleground at Hill Street as you come into town. Said, So when I ran in 2011, there were two things I knew I was going to do. They were in my business plan. I was going to canvass as much as possible, and I was going to have that billboard, which I did. And I've had it. I had it every election. I called it my lucky billboard. So, I worked hard. I took a leave of absence from Raffet Associates, which was my consulting practice that I was managing director in, and I finished up some work in June or July, and I told Bill and my other associates, I asked, so I'd like to take a leave of absence for the rest of the year. So I devoted myself full time to running for election that year, and I won. I defeated a very high profile person who had served on the county commission for 2 terms, so that was 8 years, and this was her 3rd or 4th term running on city council. And Tony Collins, a business person in town, ran that year in District 4, so there were 3 of us in the primary. And I won the primary and beat Mary. Tony came in 3rd, but I beat Mary by 50 votes in the primary. So we looked at where I needed to spend my time for the next 4 weeks between the primary and the general. We looked at the precincts where which I had not won, or those that were close. And I spent every day for those 4 weeks canvassing.
Wow.
Obviously, we did all the other things that you do too, the mailings and I had 3 billboards, I think, in that first election. But I credit the canvassing, really, just face-to-face with people and talking to them, because for over many years, people would meet me for the first time, and I wouldn't remember them possibly, but they would say to me, "You came to my house and knocked on my door." Or I had people say to me, "I saw your billboard, and I'm amazed that you're not much taller than you are." So anyway, so much for and so I've run 5 campaigns, 3 2-year campaigns and 2 4-year campaigns. And interestingly enough, I have won by a greater majority in each of my campaigns, which is unusual because usually as you continue to run, your vote drops off.
Piss somebody off, and yeah.
So anyway, I wasn't going to push my luck. No.
I'm watching.
I think it's important to know, particularly in politics, but in business too. It's important to know when your past due date is. And in my case, I think it's important, both in business and in politics, to make room for younger people.
Yeah.
And new ideas.
Yep.
And I believe strongly in that. So I've mentored in my business career. I always said one of the things I most enjoyed about my business career was mentoring younger people. And to some extent, that I feel the same way in my political career or my elected career. It's not so much political, but elected career. And so I knew that I had really mentored 2 people over the last 13 years or so in terms of giving them an opportunity to serve in governing or board commission opportunities at the city, which are volunteer, of course. So I knew that potentially there were two candidates that I felt I had really groomed, and both of them were interested or expressed an interest to me. And then the one person decided that the timing was not right for her, and so Adam Marshall was the other person, and he's running, and I think he'll be
cool.
a great city council member. If I think he's can be elected, and you never take anything for granted.
That's funny. That's what I was going to ask you next was it's one thing to run for office. It's a second thing to be elected. It's a third to then show up and live that life. And I was going to ask you if you had someone who was in a mentor role for you before you took the office, or whether you did or not, what was the reality of showing up for that job and then trying to work through, say, that first 12 months?
Well, there's a learning curve, I think, in any job, whether you're in the private sector or in the public sector. So there's a learning curve, and what I learned, the reality of running a city this large is very complex.
Yeah.
All the pieces, but we have the good thing is we have a professional staff, and in North Carolina, all cities are strong. The model is you have strong city management and a weak city council. In reality, in North Carolina, city councils are sort of boards of directors. They set policy.
Yeah.
Although citizens think we run the city. We are their elected representatives, and they call you if something's wrong and they want you to get it fixed. Well, we know the people within the bureaucracy of the city of Greensboro who can fix it, or who we can at least get an explanation from. But I've said sometimes that in some ways I find I guess this is my fourth career. It's been the most interesting and rewarding for me. Interesting in terms of the vast things that you deal with in terms of infrastructure and transportation and parks and recreation, in terms of providing services for citizens. So rewarding in terms of knowing that you've made good decisions for a city and for our citizens, and that you've made good decisions for the future, and which to me is they're all important, but that's extreme. And you can't just plan today. I mean, so many things require decades of planting. For instance, making sure that this city with water needs will be met for the next 50 and 100 years. Those are decisions and implementation that takes decades to achieve. So it's been a very interesting career, and a very rewarding one from that point of view. Frustrating sometimes, because there are always going to be people who disagree with every decision that you've made.
Yeah.
And I remember I had gone through the third attempt to rezone the property at Hobbs Friendly, which is 7 acres. I say it's maybe the most important 7 acres in the city of Greensboro. But in 2015, we were going through the third rezoning attempt. The second attempt would have gone through, I believe, had it not been for a couple unknown to me, and I've never known who they were, who sent an email on a Sunday morning to the president of Trader Joe's and said, "We do not want you to come to Greensboro." Because the second rezoning of that Hobbs Friendly property, there were only going to be 2 retail stores. And I said it was sort of like having retail in a park.
Yeah.
There was going to be a Walgreens drugstore and a Trader Joe's. That was it. So Trader Joe's pulled out, and so that was 2013, I guess. So then it came back for rezoning in 2015. And I worked very carefully both with the second attempt in 2013 and then the third attempt in 2015. And we really got the various neighborhoods in agreement, satisfied all of the issues. It was just the people who lived further away who were the real complainers. And my strategist, who's worked in every one of my campaigns, met with me in April of 2015 and she said, you're going to have to pull back from your support of this, Nancy, or you're not going to be reelected. And we were meeting in my office downtown. And I said, well, I'm not pulling back my support. I'm doing everything else. I'm doing everything I can to work this out so that this rezoning will take place in May. And if I don't get reelected, it will be okay because I will have made the right decision for the city. Interestingly enough, no one ran against me in 2015. It's the only election that I ran unopposed. So you can't pay attention to even what, quote, an expert tells you. You got to, it's my gut. It was my ethics that said this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So my city career has been an interesting one and a rewarding one, and I hope I've helped make good decisions long term for the city. I think I have.
Before I came here, I mentioned, leadership forum community. One of the things we discuss, of course, is the evolution of leadership from dependence to independence to interdependence and the growth that happens, usually with a big fall to understand that you need to move to that next step. And we were talking about it just from a sense of individual leadership, but I see the United States has been in that independence phase maybe the last 100 years. I think we're in a dependence phase before been independent.
Mm-hmm.
If you look to Europe, some of the older countries, they seem to have kind of gotten to that interdependence phase. Not all of them, but some of them. And I wonder where you see, I'm talking about the U.S. as a whole, but Greensboro as a city within North Carolina, is there a sense of, everything feels divided to me, even down to the local level right now, like very divided. And I'm not one of these, it's the worst it's ever been.
I think you're right. I think the atmosphere and the environment in this city council election coming up it seems very different to me than the 5 previous campaigns that I've run, which in most ways I think were fairly traditional.
Yeah.
I think you have, I know that in District 4, one of the people running and is certainly a MAGA Republican.
Yeah.
The city council election is nonpartisan, but the citizens usually know where you're aligned in your personal politics. Although I will tell you, in my 14 years on city council, there are no Republican or Democratic decisions on city council.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. You're there to make the best decisions for the city, and sometimes that may be more helpful to some part of the city than another. But it's really an equalizing kind of thing. But it is different today.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to sort of see how this plays out. I think we've got some at-large candidates who are fairly conservative. I mean, MAGA conservative. Then you've got some traditional conservative people, and then you've got some that run the other way as well. So this election will be interesting from that point of view. What disturbs me is the one candidate in particular right now is using social media a lot. Most of you couldn't yet. He probably hadn't raised any money, and he's good at social media because he's a tech guy. But so much of the stuff being put out there is really is not truthful. Is really it's just it's not just that it's not factual. It's just wrong in so many ways, misleading. And I don't know, I don't think very many people are paying attention to that because quite frankly, I think people in Greensboro don't pay much attention to local politics. And they only begin maybe paying attention probably late September before they're going to vote in October and November. So to the extent that any of that has traction, I just don't know. It'll be interesting for me as an observer of local politics to kind of see how that plays out this year.
Yeah. I always think of it, it's one thing to share something that's not factual. It's another thing to lie.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I think about
Or
it is.
or to show or say things that are just so misleading.
Yeah. Which to me, I mean, at the end of the day, we all make mistakes. Sometimes we get bad data. Sometimes we don't understand the data. People make mistakes. I have no problem with that. But when you're outright just lying.
When you are overtly.
Yeah. And maliciously lying.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge. Yeah. So you're coming to the end of what you said was maybe your fourth career.
Yeah.
Maybe taking this, maybe, I don't want to say a step back, but a step back in the sense that going back to some work that you used to do, if you feel like it. Usually when people hear the word legacy, they think financial, and I don't ever get into the financial side. I think if you're lucky enough to be able to leave a financial legacy, that's great. Most people aren't going to leave much in that sense. But I often wonder, you've done so much in your life. You're obviously very intelligent and analytical, but you also seem to be very reflective. So I wonder, do you think about your legacy with regard to what you've already built and then what you will be leaving behind and who it impacts?
In the city of Greensboro? Or
in
just
your life generally, yeah.
I think I've had an impact at the city. I think, I was the driving force behind creating a new department at the city, and that's the Department of Arts and Culture, which we call Creative Greensboro. That the cultural center and our arts and cultural activity had always been under the Parks and Recreation Department, which meant it was a stepchild, and nobody paid any attention to it, including the Cultural Arts Center, which is in very bad repair.
I was going to say, I know Josh Sherrick and have
I love Josh.
Yeah. But, he's
one of the good guys.
He had an impossible job.
He's one of the really good, such a good guy. He just can get things done. But, I've already laid out a plan for our new city manager at this point in terms of what I think needs to be done. And that, I would be willing to sort of be the advocate and the spokesperson in the private sector for what we need to do as a city at some point in the future, in the near future, in order to really bring that building up to really that building needs to be totally redesigned and renovated. It's I think architecturally it was a wonderful idea of bringing two buildings together with the atrium. But your buildings are the two buildings are chopped up into all of these little spaces. Yeah. So I've said we need to be investing as much money there as we've invested in the Science Center.
Yep.
Your Cultural Arts Center is as important to this city as the Science Center, and it can be just as much a destination for visitors as is the Science Center. But you've got to invest in it. So I'm hoping, I'm hoping that the city will move in that direction in the future. I won't be there, but I've said I could and would be the public face of speaking for it and helping to raise money if that were necessary. And I've kind of laid out a plan. So, I think certainly, I was a supporter of the Tanger Center and it being downtown from day one. I saw the rationale behind that. And I was kind of the vote counter on city council for over 3 or 4 years when we had very crucial votes to get that done. I've put my own money where my mouth was to some extent. I commissioned and gave to the city the artwork that is behind the dais in the chambers.
Yeah.
And then I put together the deal to to buy from friends of mine, and I put my own money in the deal and got friends to do the same for the 3 wonderful pieces of sculpture that are downtown at the little park across the street from Union Square.
Oh, yeah.
There are 3 sculptures by a Milwaukee artist named Stephen Fisher. And I think those sculptures, they are, not that it matters, but I think that they will increase in value over time. So, I feel like I've tried to give back to this city in ways other than just serving, but things that I thought were good for the city and for our citizens. So, if there's any, I'm not looking for a legacy, but I'm happy that I could do the things that I've done.
Yeah, that's good.
I've been a supporter of downtown. I owned a building downtown. I owned 3 buildings downtown. I renovated 2 of them and fully renovated the Scuppernong building. And so, I'm really proud of that. It never achieved my hope that I really hoped that it was going to spur the redevelopment of that whole block. It hasn't happened, but maybe one day it will. So, I serve on the local government commission. That was an appointment from Governor Cooper. And I just got a call last week or week before from a young man in Governor Stein's office asking me if I wanted to be reappointed. And I said that, yes, I'd like very much to serve again. I think my position on the local government commission is a city elected official position. And I'm not sure whether you have to actively be serving, or I can fill that position as having been an elected local person. But anyway, I've enjoyed that work immensely. I'd love to continue it. The local government commission has to approve all borrowings from any municipality in North Carolina, county, town, city. In other words, if they want to issue bonds, if they want to borrow money, they have to bring their proposal to us. We vet it, and we approve the borrowing. So I've found that just another very interesting aspect of something I got to do as a result of being in public office.
Yeah. And what I was going to say is you've got that, probably personal things, but I mean, as you look ahead, you're obviously still in great shape mentally and physically, also getting older, but are there specific things
I have a file of things
Really?
that
Okay.
I'm thinking about or considering for next year. So
I was going to say you talked about writing business plans and like all the preparation, and I sort of felt like you
I have
might
some
have
thoughts
some
regarding
things.
consulting. I have
Yeah.
some thoughts about I've when I was first elected to city council, then newly elected Mayor Perkins called me maybe before I was even sworn in and said, "I'm putting you on the ABC board as our council liaison, and I want you to fix it."
Yeah.
Well, 14 years later, I, along with a good chairman and some others, have helped fix it, and I helped fix it by, over the first 4 or 5 years, appointing some appropriate people to the board, including a woman whom I had recruited here to be a senior VP at the Fresh Market, who understood retailing and selling of alcohol in her prior experience, and I had known her for a long time through my executive recruiting business. She had started her early career with Harris Teeter. So I understand the ABC business in North Carolina, and I see some needs that business has with one-store operations in all of these counties. We have 100 counties in North Carolina. Most of those counties wouldn't even qualify as a town.
Yeah.
So, that's in my file. There are a few other things, and I was having this conversation. I was stopped in quickly yesterday afternoon to a little celebration of a friend's birthday. In between, I had a Convention and Visitors Bureau board meeting at 3:30 and City Council at 5:30. So I stopped in at Ellen's at 4:30. But I had a nice conversation with a woman there whom I had never met before, who was a caterer in the retail food business for many years. And so for, I don't know, for the last 20 years, she's been a career coach. And we started talking, and she said, "What are you going to do next year?" She said, "You should be a career coach." And I said, "Well, I've always felt that was an important work, but I said, you know what? I'm going to put that in my file." So who knows? I would like to, I want to stay involved. I already serve on a couple of boards and commissions. I'm on the Weatherspoon Museum board. I'm on the Carolina Theater board. So I'll continue to do that work. But there's some other things that anyway, I want to. I want to be. I want to continue something. That I want to be active in something that I'm enjoying and where I can make a difference.
Anything on the personal front? Mountains you'd like to climb, or marathons?
No, I have a little house in South Carolina. I just came back yesterday, as a matter of fact, from being there 10 days, I guess it was. I'd like to maybe spend a little more time there. Mm-hmm. I really enjoy my life there. I've traveled a lot in my lifetime, so it's not like there's anywhere that I have to go, feel that I have to go at this point, somewhere where I haven't been, that I have this burning desire. I think I want to enjoy the rest of my life quietly and with my friends, and still do some work and feel like I still contribute in some way.
Well, I think that's as good a place as any to end, and I really appreciate your time. I know we ran a little long.
This was easy.
Yeah. Good luck in whatever you do, and if I can help, let me know.
Yeah, thanks.
You can't hang on to yourself. You don't have to try not to hang on to yourself. It can't be done, and that is salvation. The most important thing for anyone to realize is that you and every person you see will soon be dead.